Did you know that these seemingly small clams can bring in tens of millions of dollars per trip? But catching them is not easy. At the bottom of the deep sea, in the cold sand, there is a hidden treasure that only experienced fishermen dare to hunt. In this video, you'll see the entire process of catching sea scallops from the moment the nets are cast into the ocean to when the scallops are shucked, cooked, and served to the table. And there's a surprising truth at the end. You won't believe what happens to these scallops. Under the thick layer of sand on the seabed, the clam net silently glides, creating a opaque dust covering the entire frame. Inside that layer of mud, the clams still have no idea that their moment of freedom is about to end. And then, from a depth of dozens of meters below the water surface, the heavy clam cage is slowly pulled up. The dawn light shines down on the sea surface, clearly illuminating each layer of sparkling clam shells that have just been brought up from the ocean floor. Each catch is a battle between man, sea, and time. And when the net is raised, the atmosphere on deck is filled with hope. And here it was the most awaited moment of the whole journey. As the heavy cage was lifted out of the water, hundreds, thousands of clams began to sparkle in the sunlight. With just one simple movement, the entire load of clams was dumped onto the deck. The sound of clams hitting the floor, the murmur of the water, and the joyful shouts of the fishermen all created a symphony of the sea. This is not only the result of many hours of hard work, but also the source of life and pride of those who depend on the sea. Once a batch of clams has been harvested, the cage has no time to rest. It continues its journey back to the seabed, where other clams are quietly nestled among the sand and moss. The cage is lowered, gently but firmly, each mesh ready for the next catch. A few hours later, to the rumble of the machine, it is pulled up again, and once again, the harvest is full. When the ship docks, the crates full of clams are lifted off the deck, spilling onto the concrete floor in the bright early morning sunlight. Some collect, some operate the crane. All operations are carried out as a synchronized chain, fast, skillful. After being sorted, the crates of clams are loaded onto trucks, ready for the next journey to factories, seafood markets, and even fancy restaurants. Once transported to the factory, the clams begin a new journey, one of selection, processing, and preparation for consumers. Skilled workers, with their practiced hands, peel off each layer of the hard shell, revealing the delicious clam meat inside. The work requires skill and patience, because just a small mistake can ruin the precious meat. After being carefully prepared, the freshest clam meat will be transferred to the modern canning line. Immediately after, the containers are covered with ice, ready for the cold storage journey to maintain absolute freshness. From afar, the ship looked like a mighty warrior in the vast ocean. The sailors stood silently in position, preparing for the decisive moment. And then the giant cage slowly rose from the water, heavy with clams that had just been pulled up from the deep sea. Every movement was decisive and precise. When the cage opened, a shower of clams rained down on the deck, covering the entire iron deck in white. It's not just seafood, it's the result of hard work, courage in the face of storms, and faith in the ocean. Once the clams were dumped onto the deck, the work did not stop. Under the harsh afternoon sun at sea, the fishermen hurriedly collected each clam into a plastic basket. Their hands moved quickly, their feet moved constantly on the slippery deck. They had to work quickly, because if they were just a few minutes late, the clams could spoil under the harsh sunlight. Each filled basket is a step closer to the final result. On a small boat in the middle of the ocean, every movement is coordinated like a machine, precise, powerful, and determined. As the sea sank into darkness, the cages continued to silently descend into the ocean. The underwater light seemed to pierce the darkness, illuminating a small part of the quiet and cold world below. The chains screeched, knocking heavily against the cage frames, echoing through the depths. The net and metal frame began to scrape lightly on the sand where the oysters usually hid deep. At this moment, No one could be sure what was waiting for them, but every time they cast their nets it was a gamble with the ocean. And this is the moment that makes all the hard work worthwhile. As the net opens, thousands of shellfish pour down like a small flood, filling the deck with echoing sounds and the colors of life. The sunlight shines on each shell, making them sparkle like treasures just pulled from the ocean floor. This is the reward not only for the effort, but also for the perseverance, for the steadfast faith of those who work in the sea. Once again, the sea gives, but only to those brave and determined enough to step out and receive it. The deck was almost completely covered with clams, the most obvious result of a big day's fishing. But for the fishermen, there was no time to celebrate for long. Once a catch was made, they began preparing for the next cast. The traps were put back in place, drag lines, chains, and nets, and they began a new journey down to the ocean floor. It is a rhythm of life that repeats itself, persistent, complete, where no one waits for the sea to give them fish, but instead seeks their own luck. Because for fishermen, the sea never sleeps, and neither do they. Once collected, the clams continue their journey, entering a meticulous and highly skilled processing stage. Each clam shell is opened by hand, a difficult operation that requires just the right amount of force and absolute precision. Inside is the ivory white, fresh and sweet meat, considered the most quintessential part that the ocean has to offer. The worker gently pushes the clam meat out and puts it in the bucket. Each cut is an accumulation of experience, training, and love for the job. From the deep sea to the kitchen, each piece of clam meat is the crystallization of a long journey, persistent, meticulous, and full of respect. From the fishing boat, the clam cages are taken straight to the processing plant, where everything happens on a large scale and at a high pace. A forklift loads each clam cage onto a conveyor belt and then pours it out like a shower of seafood. On the line, workers begin the meticulous process of sorting, cleaning, inspecting, and pre-processing each clam. Each operation is the result of a combination of modern technology and human hands, ensuring that every product leaving the factory is of the highest quality. This is not just a job, it is an indispensable part of the journey to bring seafood specialties to the meals of millions of people. Thank you guys for joining us on today's trip. If you find it interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and share to support us to make more videos. See you again in the next batch of clams.